Hey, deep divers. Ready to get aggressive today?
Sounds a little intense. But I'm game if you are.
Perfect. Well, maybe not aggressive exactly, but we are diving into a study that definitely involves some aggression. The Bobo doll experiment. Ring a bell.
Oh, yeah. Classic psych study. I remember learning about it in Intro to Psychology. Weren't those the kids hitting those inflatable clowns?
That's the one. There's a lot more to this story than just punching a toy.
I bet. There always is. So what are we looking at today with the Bobo doll?
We're going to really unpack how just watching someone else be aggressive can actually make you more aggressive too. It all comes down to this idea of observational learning.
Pretty powerful stuff, huh? That we can just pick things up by watching others.
Exactly. And it's not just about learning positive things like, new skills or helpful behaviors. We can also learn negative things. And that's what the Bobo doll experiment is all about. Like, how does that work? Like, how does that happen?
Well, I think it goes back to this sort of fundamental question about human nature. Like, why are we aggressive in the first place?
Right. Nature versus nurture and all that.
Exactly. Some folks point to biology, right? Our genes and our hormones and stuff. Others say it's all about our environment, how we were raised, the experiences we've had.
Interesting. So where does the Bobo doll experiment fit into all this?
Well, Albert Bandura, the guy behind the study, he was all about this thing called social learning theory. The basic idea is that we learn and develop through observing and interacting with others.
Ah, makes sense. So it's not just about our genes or our upbringing, but also who we surround ourselves with and what we see them doing.
Exactly. And here's the really interesting part. Bandura believed that we can pick up new behaviors even without any direct rewards or punishments.
So it's not just about learning to do things that get us what we want or avoid things that make us feel bad. There's more to it than that.
Right. Like, think about how kids learn to talk.
Yeah.
It's not like we give them a cookie every time they say a new word correctly.
True. They just sort of pick it up from listening to us, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Bandura argued that aggression worked the same way. He called it modeling. It's like creating a mental blueprint in our minds. When we see someone act a certain way, it's like we download a set of instructions for how to act in a similar situation.
So it's like monkey see, monkey do, but on a deeper level.
Exactly. And the Bobo doll experiment was Bandura's way of showing just how powerful this modeling can be, especially when it comes to aggression.
Okay, so let's dive into the experiment itself. Set the scene for us. It's 1961. You're a 4-year-old kid at Stanford's nursery school. What happens next?
Okay, so picture this. You're one of 72 kids, boys and girls, chosen for this study.
And they were all around 4 years old, right?
Right around 4 years old. And importantly, they were all assessed beforehand to see how aggressive they were naturally.
Ah, so no one group was more rambunctious than the others.
Exactly. They made sure the groups were pretty balanced in terms of that pre-existing aggression. So any differences in behavior they saw later on, those differences would be due to the experiment itself, not some pre-existing differences between the kids.
Okay, so I'm a 4-year-old. I've been picked for this study. What happens next? They bring out the Bobo doll.
Well, first, they take you into a playroom filled with all sorts of cool toy.
Fun? Like what kind of toys?
Oh, all the classics, crayons, toy trucks, a tea set. And in the corner, there it is, the Bobo doll. This big inflatable clown just begging to be played with.
Okay, I can picture it. So is this where they turn the kids loose on the Bobo doll and see what happens?
Not quite. Here's where it gets interesting. The kids were divided into 3 groups.
3 groups. Okay, so how'd that work? What made the groups different?
Each group was exposed to a different model, an adult who interacted with the Bobo doll in a specific way.
Okay, so the kids were watching these adults interact with the Bobo doll. And the experiment was seeing if the kids would copy what the adult did.
Exactly. Now, some of the kids, they saw an adult completely ignore the Bobo doll. They just played quietly with some tinker toys in the corner.
That's pretty boring for a 4-year-old, right?
Probably. But that was the control group. No aggressive model for them.
So what about the other kids? What did they see?
Well, some of them got to watch a non-aggressive model. This adult played with the Bobo doll, but in a gentle, non-aggressive way.
So no punching or kicking or anything like that?
Nope. Just nice, calm play.
Okay, so that's 2 groups down. What about the 3rd group?
Now, this is where things get a little wild. These kids were treated to a full-blown Bobo bashing show.
Whoa. So the adult just went nuts on the Bobo doll.
Pretty much. They had this whole routine worked out. They'd shout things like, "Sock him in the nose," and "Pow!" while punching and kicking the Bobo doll.
No way.
Oh, yeah. They even picked up a mallet and whacked the poor doll with it.
Wow, that's pretty intense. Like, could you imagine witnessing that as a 4-year-old?
Well, that was kind of the point. Bandura wanted to create this really vivid, memorable display of aggression to see if the kids would copy not just aggression in general, but these specific actions and phrases.
It's like they were being given a crash course in how to be aggressive.
Yeah.
But the experiment didn't end there, right? Did they just watch the adult go crazy on the Bobo doll and then call it a day?
Oh, no, there was more to it than that. The researchers wanted to see if the kids would actually act out the aggression themselves.
Okay, so what do? Give them a Bobo doll and see what happened.
Pretty much. But first, they purposely frustrated the kids a little. They might have told them they couldn't play with certain toys or something like that, just enough to get their little heart rates up, you know? Make them a little more likely to lash out.
Sneaky. Okay, so then what?
Then they took the kids into another room filled with different toys, including, you guessed it, another Bobo doll.
Okay, so now it's showtime. Did they just let the kids loose and observe what happened?
They did, but they were observing very carefully. Behind a one-way mirror, a team of judges was watching and meticulously recording everything the kids did.
I bet that was fascinating to watch. So what were they looking for exactly?
They were looking for 8 different types of aggressive responses.
8? Wow, that's a lot.
It was. But let's focus on the 4 that were most revealing, the ones that really tell the story of observational learning.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So first up, imitative physical aggression. This was literally copying the model's moves, the punching, the kicking, the mallet whacking, all of it.
Wow. So they were looking to see if the kids would mimic the exact same behaviors they had seen the adult do.
Right. And then there was imitative verbal aggression. Did the kids use the same phrases the model did, like sock him or pow?
So not just copying the actions, but also the words. Fascinating.
Right. And then they also looked for what they called mallet aggression, basically.
Yeah.
Did the kids use the mallet to hit things other than the Bobo doll?
Ah, so they were broadening it out a bit, seeing if the aggression would generalize to other objects.
Exactly. And then the last one, and this is really important, they were looking for non-imitative aggression.
Okay, so what's that? What does non-imitative mean?
Well, it means any new aggressive act the kids came up with on their own. Stuff that the model hadn't done. Like maybe they picked up a toy truck and smashed it into the wall, or maybe they started yelling insults at the Bobo doll.
Ah, so they weren't just blindly copying, they were also coming up with their own creative ways to be aggressive.
Exactly. The researchers were trying to capture the full spectrum of aggressive responses, see how much was directly copied and how much was sort of inspired by what they'd seen.
So after all that observing and recording, what did they find? Did watching an aggressive adult actually make the kids more aggressive themselves?
Well, let's just say that the kids who witnessed that Bobo beatdown, they didn't exactly hold back when they got their turn. It was like they were little sponges, just soaking up those aggressive behaviors.
So the experiment supported Bandura's idea of modeling that we can learn aggression just by watching it.
It absolutely did.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. Do you have any, specific numbers? Like, how much more aggressive were the kids who watched the aggressive model?
Oh, yeah, the numbers are actually pretty astounding. The boys, especially those who had watched the male model, they averaged 38.2 instances of physical imitation.
38.2. That's not just like one little shove. That's a lot of hitting and kicking.
Right. And they weren't just doing it once or twice. They were repeating these aggressive behaviors over and over again.
So it really does seem like seeing someone else be aggressive, especially if it's someone of the same gender, can really ramp up your own aggression levels.
It definitely seems that way. And while the non-aggressive models sometimes reduced aggression in the kids, the results weren't super consistent.
So it's not like just seeing someone be nice to the Bobo doll is going to magically make you a pacifist.
No, not quite. But it does make you wonder, right? If seeing aggression can be so powerful, what about the flip side? What about seeing kindness and compassion? Can those be learned through observation too? And if so, how can we use that knowledge to create a less aggressive, more peaceful world?
That's a great question, and one that we're going to explore in more depth in the next part of our deep dive. So stay tuned, deep divers. There's much more to come.
It makes you think, you know? Like, what if we took all that energy we put into studying aggression and, redirected it towards studying kindness?
Right, like instead of Bobo dolls getting pummeled, we had, I don't know, some sort of, kindness koala or something.
Ah! I love it, the kindness koala experiment. But actually, that's a really good point. There is a whole field of research dedicated to studying pro-social behavior, altruism, empathy, all that good stuff.
Oh, that's cool. So we study the good stuff too, not just the punching and kicking.
Yeah, definitely. It's just that, sometimes the negative stuff just grabs our attention more easily. It's like a car crash on the side of the road. You can't help but look, right?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So before we get too sidetracked by kindness koalas, let's get back to the Bobo doll experiment. There was more to it than just those live models, right?
Right. So remember how we talked about those kids watching adults interact with the Bobo doll?
Yeah, the control group, the non-aggressive model, and the Bobo bashing model.
Exactly. Well, Bandura didn't stop there. He wanted to see if the same thing would happen if the kids watched aggression on a screen. So he did a bunch of follow-up studies where he showed kids films of adults being aggressive.
Oh, wow. Like movies or TV shows?
Kind of, yeah. They weren't exactly Hollywood productions, but they were films specifically designed to show aggressive behavior. And guess what? He found the same basic pattern. Kids who watched the films with aggressive models were more likely to be aggressive themselves afterwards.
So even watching something on a screen can have a real impact on our behavior.
It seems that way. And it wasn't just limited to live-action films either. He even did studies with cartoons.
Cartoons? Really? So like Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote?
Well, I don't think they use those specific cartoons, but the idea is the same. Even watching animated characters be aggressive could make the kids more likely to act aggressively themselves.
That's kind of mind-blowing. Like, it's just a cartoon.
Right.
But it's still having a real effect.
It is, and it makes you think about all the violence we see on screens these days, not just in cartoons, but in movies, video games, news reports, you name it, it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's hard to escape it. So if just watching aggression can make us more aggressive, does that mean we're all doomed to become a society of, like, head-bashing, Bobo-punching maniacs?
Well, not necessarily. There is some good news here. Bandura also found that if the aggressive model was punished for their actions, the kids were much less likely to imitate the behavior.
Oh, really? So, like, if the adult who was beating up the Bobo doll got sent to timeout or something?
Exactly. Or if they were scolded or had their toys taken away. Basically anything that showed the kids that there were negative consequences for being aggressive.
So it's not just about what we see, but also about the message that's sent, about the consequences of that behavior.
Exactly. Think about it like this. If you see someone do something bad, but they get away with it, you might be more likely to try it yourself, right? But if you see them get punished for it, you're probably going to think twice.
That makes sense. It's like we're constantly learning from the world around us, picking up cues about what's okay and what's not okay.
Right. And that's actually a really hopeful finding because it suggests that we can use this knowledge to our advantage. If we want to reduce aggression, we need to make sure that it's not being rewarded or glorified. We need to show people that there are consequences for their actions.
That's a pretty powerful message. So it's not just about limiting exposure to violence. It's also about making sure that when we do see violence, it's not being presented in a way that makes it seem cool or acceptable.
Right. We need to be critical of the media we consume, and we need to talk to kids about the difference between fantasy and reality. Violence might be entertaining in a movie, but it has real-life consequences.
I like that. Be critical and have conversations. That's good advice for everyone, not just kids. But I'm curious, what about individual differences? Surely not every kid who saw the Bobo doll get clobbered turned into a tiny aggressor, right?
Oh, you're absolutely right. It wasn't like a one-to-one correlation. Not everyone who sees aggression is going to become aggressive themselves.
So what accounts for those differences? Why are some people more susceptible to this modeling effect than others?
Well, that's a really complex question, and there's no easy answer. There are a lot of factors that come into play: personality, genetics, upbringing, life experiences, the whole shebang. But one thing that Bandura's research really highlights is the power of social context.
What do you mean by social context?
Well, think about the kids in the Bobo doll experiment. They weren't just passive observers. They were also interacting with each other, with the researchers, with the whole environment, and all of that was shaping their behavior.
So it's not just about what we see, but also about how we interpret it, how we relate it to our own lives, and how the people around us respond to it.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to create environments that discourage aggression and promote pro-social behavior. If we surround kids with positive role models, if we teach them how to resolve conflicts peacefully, if we reward kindness and empathy, we're creating a social context that makes aggression less likely.
I like that. It's not just about controlling what kids see. It's about creating a whole culture of peace.
Exactly. And that brings us back to your idea of the kindness koala. We need to be studying and promoting those positive behaviors just as much as we study the negative ones. We need to be creating those positive models both in real life and in the media.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about kids, but what about adults? Does this whole observational learning thing still apply to us grown-ups?
It absolutely does. We never stop learning through observation. Just think about how easily we pick up slang, fashion trends, or even mannerisms from the people around us. We're constantly adapting and evolving based on what we see and experience.
So even as adults, we're still being influenced by the models we see, whether we realize it or not.
That's right. And that means we have a responsibility to be mindful of the models we're providing for others, not just kids. What behaviors are we normalizing? What messages are we sending about what's acceptable and what's not?
It's like we're all part of this big, messy social experiment,
Yeah.
constantly shaping and being shaped by everyone around us.
It really is. And it's not always a conscious process either. We're absorbing information and learning new behaviors all the time, whether we realize it or not.
That's kind of freaky when you think about it. Like, what if we're picking up all sorts of bad habits and negative behaviors without even knowing it?
Well, that's definitely a possibility. But the good news is we're not just passive recipients of information. We can also choose what we pay attention to, what we internalize, and what we ultimately act on.
So we have some control over this whole modeling thing. It's not just like monkey see, monkey do all the time.
Exactly. We have the power to choose our models, to question the messages we're receiving, and to consciously decide what kind of person we want to be.
Okay, I like that. It's empowering. It means we're not just at the mercy of our environment. We can actually shape our own destinies, to a certain extent at least.
Absolutely. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating and perhaps slightly disturbing aspects of Bandura's later research.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Hit me with it.
So remember how we talked about how seeing aggression punished can reduce imitation?
Yeah, like if the Bobo bashing adult got sent to timeout, the kids were less likely to copy that behavior.
Right. Well, Bandura also explored the flip side of that coin. What happens when aggression is rewarded?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Like, does seeing someone get away with being a jerk make you more likely to be a jerk yourself?
Exactly. And what he found was pretty eye-opening. When the kids saw the aggressive model being rewarded for their behavior,
Yeah.
whether it was praise, treats, or even just getting to continue playing without any consequences, it was like giving them permission to do the same.
So it's almost like the reward is a signal that says, hey, this behavior is okay. It's actually a good way to get what you want.
That's a great way to put it. It's like a green light for aggression.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, we see this happening all the time in the real world, not just in a lab setting.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like when bullies get away with picking on other kids, or when people get promoted at work even though they're ruthless and cutthroat.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to individual behavior either. Think about how violence is often portrayed in the media, in movies, TV shows, video games. It's often glamorized, sensationalized, and presented as a solution to problems.
Yeah, the hero always saves the day by blowing stuff up or beating up the bad guys.
Right. And while that can be entertaining, it also sends a message that violence is effective, maybe even necessary, and that there are rarely any real consequences for it.
Which is a pretty dangerous message, especially for kids who are still developing their understanding of the world.
Exactly. It's like we're inadvertently creating a breeding ground for more aggression by constantly exposing people to these messages. And it's not just kids who are susceptible to this. Adults can be influenced by these messages too, especially if they're already predisposed to aggression.
So what can we do about it? Is it a lost cause?
I don't think so. There's a lot we can do. First of all, we need to be more aware of the messages we're sending, both in our own behavior and in the media we consume. We need to be critical thinkers and ask ourselves, is this really how we want to solve problems? Is this the kind of world we want to live in?
So it's about being more mindful and intentional with the messages we're putting out there.
Absolutely. And it's also about creating a culture that values peace, empathy, and compassion. We need to be teaching kids and reminding ourselves that there are better ways to handle conflict, that violence is never the answer.
I love that. It's not just about controlling aggression. It's about promoting kindness.
Exactly. We need to be celebrating those positive behaviors, rewarding them, and making them the norm. And I think that's a perfect note to end our deep dive on. The Bobo doll experiment might be about aggression, but the real takeaway here is that we have the power to choose a different path. We can choose to be models of peace, empathy, and compassion, and in doing so, we can create a better world for ourselves and for generations to come.
Well said. So deep divers, keep diving deep, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep choosing kindness. Until next time.